Am I right, sir, or am I wrong? You guys, it is Wednesday. So last week was the beginning of our new series that we're going to be doing on Wednesday. So we're going to have interviews with dope people doing dope stuff. And you guys can always weigh in, as usual, 818-293-7547, 818-293-7547, or shoot us an email. I'm mad, IMMAD at unafraidshow.com. You guys enjoy the interview. She's dope. Let's get it going. And now we're joined on Right or Wrong by Rachel Luba, MLB agent, Renaissance woman. She also, in addition to that, she's the first woman to ever negotiate $100 million contract and also the first to represent a Cy Young winner. She's the host of the Corked Up podcast with Jessica Kleinschmidt, and she also does her YouTube channel where she explains the arbitration process with other agents and all that kind of stuff. Rachel, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, I guess we'll start at the beginning, right? So you are are you a female agent or are you a agent?
I am an agent. I am a female, but I am an agent.
So how does that, you are the first to represent a Cy Young winner in Trevor Bauer. You are the first to negotiate $100 million contract as a female agent. So guess let's take it back. Like, how did you become an agent because this is such a male dominated industry?
Well, first, I just want to point out that while I am the first female in all these things, I'm also just the first agent, like male or female, to negotiate a single season of $40+ million. So there is that. You don't have to qualify it with female on that one. But I guess it kind of started, I was a gymnast since the age of 2, went to UCLA, was a gymnast at UCLA, and, knew I wanted to work in sports, and I wasn't exactly sure at first what I wanted to do. And then, when I got to UCLA, I started, honing it in a bit and realized I was interested in helping the individual athlete. That's what I was most passionate about, probably because I was always an individual sport athlete. So, started thinking of what are some things that I could do on that side of the sports industry. And, athlete representation kind of stuck out to me. So I started thinking about that. And I, happened to be good friends with a lot of the UCLA baseball players while I was at UCLA. And, they tell you should, if you think you know what you want to do, like, talk to people in that industry and get their take on it and just kind of pick their brain. So naturally I did that. One of the first agents I happened to talk to was a baseball agent. And the conversation that we had, I went to his office. He, was sitting at his desk, and I sat down, and he was like, look, from what I can tell, like, seems like you know what you want to do, so I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And he just, like, kicked his feet up on his desk and leaned back. He's like, you're a girl. And just stared at me. And I was like, yeah, I know. And we had an awkward moment. And then he was like, what I'm saying is you're not really welcome in the industry. And then at that point, I think I was annoyed. And he was like, look, I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just the reality. Like, it's a boys' club. And I, kind of figured, okay, this is pointless. I was like, is that it? And he was like, well, I mean, I guess if you want any chance and any sort of credibility, like at the very least, you're going to have to get a law degree. So I walked out of there and I was text my parents. I was like, I'm going to go to law school. And that's how I made my decision. And I oftentimes credit him for being the one to really push me towards baseball, because I'm like, knowing my personality, I'm fairly confident that if he would, talk to me that first time and was like, it's a great industry. These are different avenues people take to get into it. yada yada, I would have walked out of there and been like, cool, like now I'm gonna go, try to talk to an NFL agent or an NBA agent. But him telling me off the bat that you're not welcome in the industry was exactly what made me want to go into that specific industry.
So George asked you your origin story in the agency world, but I'm very curious about what your origin story, or maybe like what age you were at when you first encountered social media. Because of all of the people that we've had on this show and that we've encountered, you're probably doing it the best. Like that if I was to describe your social media usage, it would be 5-tool player. You're all over YouTube, um, Twitter, and I mean, it's just every time there's a viral moment in baseball, like with the D-backs the other day, I see you in the replies applauding them for doing a good job. I see your name attached to all of these things. I have a friend of mine from Arizona, Molly McManamy, who just had a feature story written about her in the Arizona Republic, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. Molly, like in her hometown paper, just got written about, and you're the first name that I see in the replies congratulating her. I mean, you are all over the place. How did you get to the point where you were able to harness the power of social media and have it really, I think, enhance your success in this industry?
Yeah, I think you're spot on the, with that it has really enhanced my ability to have success in this industry. And it was a scary thing to buy into, because I think social media in a lot of ways is a tricky thing to navigate. And there's, a lot of uncertainty with it because it's dangerous. It can be your downfall too. I think, to be honest with you, the person who really encouraged me to use social media and all of these different platforms, even the ones that I'm super uncomfortable with, which by the way are like Twitter. I've always hated Twitter. I didn't have a Twitter. My Twitter account when I launched my agency in 2019 was the first time I actually like logged in. I changed my handle and I was like, all right, fine. Like I will use this. I had it for when I interned at a baseball agency in law school. They made us follow all the clients on their roster, but other than that, never used it. So it wasn't until 2019 I used that. I hate YouTube. I don't really watch YouTube, so I don't really get the value of it, but I'm using that. But it was my client Trevor Bauer who really got me to buy into all of these different platforms. And I think we have a very interesting kind of dynamic between the two of us with social media, because I've watched him. I've known him for 11 years or so now. I've watched him from the beginning with his use of social media and how poorly he used social media. And I was always the one to just be like, what are you doing? Like, we cannot use social media this way. Like, it's not even like you're just not helping yourself, but you're hurting yourself too. And so I've always been kind of there with him, trying to get him to better understand how to use it to his benefit. And he's, equally though helped me in getting me to use all these different platforms and to, see all these different platforms as different tools, and use them for different purposes. What my Instagram is for, which was always the one I was most comfortable with. Just from the beginning, it's the one I liked the most. Using that for now, the purpose of it is really to drive home this message that's really important to me about, you can be feminine, you can be anything you want and still be a professional. You don't need to conform to some, made up mold of whatever men expect of you, or I don't know, whatever it is. So that's kind of like the purpose of Instagram, whereas the purpose of, Twitter is to kind of get my voice out there on big, baseball related issues or sports related issues. The GMs all read what I tweet, so that I know there's value there. Using it in that way. YouTube is to kind of, be someone who educates people on different things within the industry so that I can, form some sort of or establish some sort of reputation as someone who does really understand, various topics in the industry and is, quote unquote, an expert in, this side of the baseball industry. So I've learned over the years how to use social media, but it's not necessarily something that I've always been comfortable with.
Yeah, see, I like the fact that you have a
But
plan for it.
George, I want to jump in real quick, George. Because I want to point out something that you did like a month and a half back that was just, I mean, it was next level. Actually, like came up with or you took somebody's suggestion as far as people who are fans of you, and gave them the name the Lubanati, and then you have your own account and you use that to promote and showcase people who are out and about wearing the merch that you've popularized from all of your other platforms. Like you have this feedback loop of everything going to benefit the brand and stay on message. And you talk about a long time with Trevor Bauer of trying to get him to exercise that discipline in his social media usage. Is that just you taking all of the advice you've been giving for the last 11 years and applying it to your own practice?
Yeah, pretty much. It's funny because now sometimes I also hear him giving me the same advice that I've given him, and I'm like, oh, like we've come full circle here. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really easy to do from an outsider's perspective, I think. Like I've always probably had a bigger vision for stuff with Bauer than for myself, but then I have really made an effort, and he's tried to help me in, doing kind of the same thing that he's done. And, he does a really good job with building his brand and all the different social media platforms that he uses. Now he's got like a full team working for him, with doing all his social media, which is very helpful. I don't have that. I kind of try to handle most of it myself. But yeah, I thought the Lubanati like name was so cool and smart, and I loved it. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna run with it. And what better way, to everyone who's wearing, Luba Sports stuff. And I was always surprised when people went out in the beginning and were buying Luba Sports merch. I was like, why would you buy? I'm just it's an agency and I'm just a person. But Bauer was the one who kind of talked to me about it. He was like, look, but you created this, this brand. Like there's a message behind kind of who you are and your personality.
Yes.
And people they like representing that and they like promoting it. And it took me a while to really buy into that too, because I felt like I'm just like, them. I don't know why you would, and this is just like my company. But they love it. And so, it's free advertising, right? They all rock their stuff, and I feature them, and it's a way to interact. And I'm gonna have some more cool like Lubanati merch and like necklaces that I'm gonna come out with soon.
See, the cool part is that I don't think that you intended, which is super dope, that you didn't intend for you becoming an agent to actually be so meaningful to so many other people. Like I would have, like I want a Luba Sports shirt because I like you, I like what you represent, and I think that that's why people want the merch, because you represent, in my eyes, a powerful, strong person. You're young in doing it, and also the fact that you're willing to be yourself. You know what I mean? Like that, like on your Instagram and all that. So like, so my question to you is how did you get into the industry in terms of getting your first client? Because that can be difficult. I mean, whether you're a man agent, woman agent, anybody, getting that first client is hard, and especially a big name client. So how were you able to, to go from zero to suddenly being thrust into that, not just the big leagues, but the big league of the big leagues?
People, I think, oftentimes think of me as an overnight success or something. couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, I've spent the last 11 years working towards this. I told you when I sat down with that agent, that was my freshman year at UCLA. My UCLA bio, as a student athlete, what talked about my career goal was like being a sports agent. So this was something that I've been working at. And obviously I've known Trevor for, a long time. We were both student athletes together at UCLA and we kept in touch. And I think, he happened to kind of be the perfect fit for my first client because one, he's someone who, he isn't built at, just kind of this freak natural athlete. Like I make fun of him all the time about how I am way more athletic than he is. And he knows that. He'll never deny it. He's not, he'll tell you, like, he's probably one of the worst athletes in MLB. But he, growing up, he loved baseball and he's got, his dad is a chemical engineer by trade. Trevor in college was a mechanical engineer major. He's got this engineering background and he used, physics and math to basically find ways to create pitches and create a weapon basically that could thrive at the MLB level. So he doesn't view anything as you have to be one type of person in order to succeed or thrive in anything. So I think me wanting to be an agent, he never, and be a baseball agent, he never questioned it. He was never like, well, you're a girl. I don't know if you could do that. You never played, so that's going to be tricky. He was like, yeah, if you do the right things and you work hard enough, you have a chance. Like there is a chance for you. So he saw, I think, the natural progression over the years, all the work I put in, the different opportunities I was able to create for myself, starting or becoming an attorney at the MLBPA and all the salary arbitration cases that I was able to take to hearing. And, when I decided I wanted to start my own agency and I had this different idea for how I wanted to really operate the agency, I talked with him about it a lot over probably the course of like a year and a half, 2 years. And he's all about exploiting inefficiencies in the industry and in different avenues or aspects of a certain industry. And so he, bought into this idea that, yeah, this is the athlete representation in baseball or in basically every sport is not that great. It's everyone does it one way. There's one option and that's it. And it's not necessarily the best. And so I kind of convinced him that this is a better way. And it was a slow burn because it's not like he didn't like his agent. He very much liked his agent. His agent, a great job for him. But it was that getting him to see that it's not the agent specifically, it's the industry, it's how they go about athlete representation and the model that's used. And this is a better way. And he ended up buying in. And then the hardest part was convincing his dad and his parents. I had known them, but his dad was not thrilled about Trevor risking, his career and entrusting someone who technically has no real, proven track record with something so, big, like having them negotiate this contract. So that was a tough sell.
Well, for me, when I looked at it and I saw how you did with those arbitration cases in 2017, that you won a record 12 arbitration cases. So that, I think, it probably, was able to give Trevor a little bit of comfort and say, hold up, nah, she out there getting cast their money. So she'll do the same thing for me. But you talked about a different model of athlete representation. What does Luba Sports and Rachel Luba do differently than your traditional MLB agent or person who represents athletes?
So I operate much more like a law firm. I charge for the service provided. I didn't reinvent the wheel with that at all by any means. Most people are pretty familiar with the idea that they, in different industries in the world, they pay for a service. However, in athlete representation, the agent is profiting off of a commission based on the value that the athlete himself or herself creates on the field. And it's kind of silly. The other thing with baseball specifically, I know it's a little different sometimes in other sports, but an agent locks in that 10-year contract for you. He could get fired the very next day. He has locked in the commission though for the entire 10 years. So he doesn't have to do a day of work after that contract, and he's paid. And he's paid the same type of work that he does for that huge contract and that player that got that huge contract. It might be the same type of work that he does for the player who's making, $1 million for 1 year. And, he's making vastly different, amounts. And so it also creates a scenario where simply just because of the value of the player himself, the agent has a different level of incentive to do certain work for certain players versus others. So again, it just kind of came back to I wanted to charge for the value of my service that I'm providing. And so when I do work for the player pays for it. And when I don't do work for the player, like the player's not just paying me because of value he's creating himself. And so it aligns incentives better. It allows me to, I'm incentivized to do work for the player. That's how I make money. And, I think it also allows players to really choose what's important to them, because there are plenty of players that they are fine talking to their agent 3 times a year for, maybe 10, 15 minutes. And that's all they need. They don't need much. They don't want to do much. But why are they paying the same kind of percentage as the player like Trevor Bauer, who is so high maintenance and wants so much done for him? I think a lot of athletes too, they're fine paying for something as long as they feel like they're actually getting value in return.
You sound like a disruptor. You sound like somebody who other agents want to throw things at.
Yeah, they don't like me too much. There's already been several agencies over the last couple of years. Once I negotiated Trevor's first contract, which was his final salary arbitration year before free agency, I had like several offers of agents asking if they could like buy me out or, whatever. So as much as that was kind of nice and I was like, oh, it's enticing in the beginning, it was kind of a reminder of like, okay, no, you're doing something right if that's the road setting.
Yep.
What's interesting to me is how you seem to have a much more firm understanding of social currency beyond just what your play on the field dictates, because George says stuff like this all the time. The game's never going to love you as much as you love the game. There's always going to be something next. George is always, focused on that transition. Even what George is doing now with this podcast, the transition from life as an athlete to beyond. You seem to understand that social currency matters a great deal, and I think this is kind of a curveball of a question, but I think you'll be cool with it. You were at UCLA, you were a gymnast, you're a few years older than Caitlin Ohashi, and then all of a sudden you see a UCLA gymnast blow up, go viral, become a national sensation. Did you have an inkling that some of these things were possible if athletes were doing some of the legwork with the tools that were available to them, that even a UCLA gymnast could become essentially a sports fan's household name even when you were there?
I mean, yeah, I don't know if when I was there I necessarily thought about it. I don't think I really started thinking about the value of social media in that way at UCLA. I don't think it was really until, while I was in law school, or maybe even just kind of graduating and going in, really now going into the baseball world. But it's absolutely, and I believe in it and subscribe to it, that what you can do with social media is so much more impactful in the long run than whatever your immediate or current kind of career is. Because, and I tell like all my minor league guys this, I tell even my big league guys, even someone like Yasiel Puig, who I have, who he's got, he's close to like 1 million followers on even just Instagram. And, I talked to him about social media and he's like, I don't really care. And he's so lucky to have that many followers. And I'm like,
Oh
listen,
my God, the dude, he missed out on, if he didn't embrace that. I mean, like because I'm a huge Dodgers fan. So, I mean, I remember the Puig your friend. Dude, do you know how much that was
yeah,
worth out here?
yeah. So, he goes through, ebbs and flows with that and buying into social media, but sometimes, and it's easy for an athlete or someone to just kind of at times just roll their eyes at it and, blow it off and say it doesn't matter and I don't care about it when, maybe things aren't going your way. But there is so much value in creating a brand, because one day, like, you will make a set amount of money in your sport. For if you're a gymnast, if you're, Caitlin Ohashi, like, you're not going to make necessarily even a career on your sport. However, you can take that small amount of time that you have as somebody, notable in your sport. I tell minor league guys this, no one knows that, what minor league baseball is actually like. They just see you're a professional athlete and they see that blue check mark, and people want to give stuff to you. People want to follow you. People, you can literally be nobody and you could be someone who will never even make it past, high A. But if you have that blue check mark, if you can say you're a professional athlete, like, people will follow you. Build that brand now, because when you never make it past high A, you're suddenly, eventually you're going to retire, but you have this huge following. You've got that blue check mark, and now, let's say you wanted to be a broadcaster or whatever you wanted to do. You've already got this personality. It's so much easier to do things with it.
I think one of the coolest thing discovering about you from this interview is that you actually bought into using social media. So all of these agents out there that see you as a disruptor or see you doing something that they feel like maybe they can't do themselves, and you come on this podcast and you're like, I wasn't a believer in this. I was uncomfortable with the idea of Twitter. I'm not somebody who consumes YouTube, but you're still able to see the importance in it. I will tell you this. You brought up Yasiel Puig. Would not have known, and I'm a baseball fan and I'm not a Dodgers fan, so I'm kind of incentivized to know a little bit more about Puig as a Diamondbacks fan, because I gotta have more reasons to hate the guy, right? So, but I would not have known, and I don't know why I didn't know this, but I wouldn't have known about his background if it wasn't for you tweeting about it. I had no idea that the guy went through literal hell just to be on this soil. Had no clue.
Cut off his hands with the
and
machete.
Because of social media.
Yeah.
Right. And because of social media, I know now.
Yeah, there's incredible stories that I think make people able to relate to athletes, or, empathize with them, or, sympathize, whatever it is. And that's what allows people to have connections with athletes and become fans of them and follow them and root for them. I think that's so important, especially in a day, like in an era when, with a lot of sports now, we don't see these lifers with one franchise, and they go their whole career. It's much rarer now that you have that. You've got, you've got players like, even in baseball, with Trevor Bauer, who wants to sign these short-term deals. Now, he might sign a short-term deal like every year or two with the same organization, but he could bounce all over the place. But, creating a fan of Trevor Bauer brings fans, no matter where he goes, like, they're going to follow him. there's so many people that are LeBron James fans. And guess what? They rooted for the Heat at one point. They rooted for the Cavs at one
Yep.
point, and now they root for the Lakers. And why? Not because they just like all those different teams necessarily. They're LeBron James fans.
Yeah. I was.
I want to shake any baseball player that like so Archie Bradley, while he was in Arizona, he used to tweet about the restaurants he would go to. And it drives me nuts. It's this ingratiate yourself to the community. Tell people where you're going, what you like to do, and just like celebrate the community. And they'll be like, I live there, I'm from there. This is great. This guy likes it too. I like this guy. And there are 5 to 40 players on every MLB roster, and that's a rarity. It is extremely insane to me that there are all these tools available for people to ingratiate themselves with the community, make themselves more marketable, and you're not seeing it. And to see you help people realize that they can do that, like you're not on the highway that the men drove that they tried to keep you off of. You built your own road, and now they're going to have to pull over, take that exit if they want to be relevant 5-10 years from now. They're going to have a path that you blazed, and that's the funniest thing about all of this.
Yeah.
Rachel, I want to look at the arbitration process for just a minute, because you talk about it on your YouTube channel, and you're going to have like there is one case in particular. So if you were working on Shohei Otani's on his arbitration in a year from now, like how much would you be asking for? I mean, this is because we're seeing something that's completely unprecedented. So how would that process work, being that he's a pitcher, but then he hits every damn day almost? So and not only does he hit, he's one of the league leaders in home runs. Like this is something that we've never seen. So how do you think that his arbitration will go, or that whole process?
It's funny because when I was at the MLBPA, it was when he had gotten, they posted him and he was coming over to the US. And I remember sitting down with some of the lawyers and just being like, oh my God, when this guy gets to arbitration, it's going to be the best case. Because that's what, I mean, if you're a nerd like me and you geek out over arbitration, it's cases like this that are so fun because you really to try to get creative and find ways to make arguments of like, look, he's in a whole, market of his own. It's just, you can't necessarily compare him to just one or the other. And arbitration is so much about you fit into these just like the structure, they call it, of the market. And it's so just cookie cutter, black and white. There's no, like, in general, MLB tries to keep it so there's no gray area. It's like, these are the things. If you have it, you get this. If you don't, whatever. And so it's really fun when agents, too, aren't afraid to take a player to hearing, and players aren't afraid to, try to fight for, a certain salary, which it can be scary at times, but that's how you move such a stagnant market, such as arbitration, which essentially, every player, the salary that they get in arbitration, it's based off of looking back a couple years at someone who, maybe came a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years before them, who was very comparable, and what they got. And how did they get their salary? By looking back a couple years before that. And so that market never moves unless you get the guys who are these, kind of different level players that are willing to, rather than like Kershaw, who signs an extension early on and just misses out on arbitration. Instead you get a Mookie Betts who doesn't sign an extension, decides, nope, and I'm going to go to hearing and I'm going to push that market and, get something that's unprecedented. And that's the fun part of it. So I think Shohei, obviously, he's going to be in a league of his own. But there's going to be plenty of counterpoints to, from the team side, where, look, he can play two different positions. It's it's really unheard of today, but at the same time, you could argue like he's never really given us like the full value of either one as well. And so does that hurt him? There's going to be like plenty of counters on his as well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the state of kind of the players versus the union, the players in union versus the owners, because it appears that we're headed for a work stoppage, which I think would be devastating to baseball, particularly if it drags on out to the start of the season, because we remember what happened 94, 90, 95, that whole deal, and it tanked some of the ratings. All like people just didn't feel good about it. Like, do you think that that's ultimately going to happen, and do you foresee a different structure with how players are paid, because they're really the only main league whose the MLB whose player salaries are not attached to the revenue that's brought in.
Right, but they're also baseball's the only league that will not show their books either. The owners won't show their books, so we don't know, and they don't want to show their books. It's not that
There's
we have
a reason why.
exactly. So there, I don't think either party has much incentive to necessarily attach salary to revenue,
Yeah.
because it's also like baseball. I mean, the player side, I think most are smart enough to see that there are pretty easy ways to manipulate your revenue, so that it looks like you're maybe not making as much when maybe you also own they can own the parking structures, and maybe the streets where all the bars are, those owners own that. And so for game days, they're making all that revenue that's coming in, but they won't count that as actual baseball revenue, even though they wouldn't have it without the team. So I don't think either side is too like into that idea necessarily,
Yeah.
but you never know. I think the relationship right now between the two parties is not great, but that's more so the MLB, or that's more so MLB and the MLBPA.
Yeah.
And I think the leaders in both of those organizations need to figure out a way how to have a better relationship, because there's no reason that two parties that need to work together all the time, because that's how we have baseball, that they can't sit down at a table and work something out. They're constantly trying to get the win, and the other side gets the loss always. And like, that's not how you have a good working relationship. Like, they need to see that they both have kind of the same objectives in many ways.
One thing about people who break shit for the sake of progress is sometimes they can't stop. And I hear you talking about the league, and I've heard you on other podcasts talk about ways to make baseball more fun and things like that. At what point do you feel like it's enough? Like, when you have their attention, because you're continually critiquing the way the game is run, the way that things have traditionally been done versus the way that they could be, which would benefit everybody involved, trying to convince them you have the same exact concerns as they do, which is to.
Okay.
Yeah. Did we lose him?
Oh, did I disappear?
Yes.
Just to sum up my question is, like, what's that point for you where you feel like you have to pull back or jump in, to criticize baseball and the way that it's run for the greater good?
I think I do it a fair amount, and I did it a fair amount, especially during like quarantine negotiations. I also think my client Trevor Bauer does it a fair amount, and can often be he has a like target on his back because of it. But I think someone has to do it, because if there's one thing I've learned with baseball, it's that, and this goes for basically anything in the sport, if somebody doesn't just shed light on it in public or on social media, then baseball will sweep it under the rug, and just to the point of like their downfall, because they never, I think in the history of the entire sport, have ever they don't like controversy, they don't like dealing with that.
Yep.
So they avoid it, and they turn a blind eye until their hand is literally forced. You see it with every cheating scandal, every anything. You have to have someone, you have to have a Mike Fiers come out and just say to the media, like, I'm not even going to go to MLB, because by the way, players did go to MLB. MLB didn't do anything. Then they go to the media, and the media is like, hey, this is happening, and now fans are mad, and now MLB has to do something. They do this with everything. So until people kind of push back, and players and people in the industry push back on MLB in social media, to the point where the public now is putting pressure on MLB, like, MLB will keep operating the way they do.
So do you think that that's the reason why the league was so soft on the players when it came to the Astros? Because yes, they punished the general manager, they fired the manager, but then when it came to the players, and that whole situation with Altuve, whether he was wearing a wearable, I've talked to players privately, and they're like, bro, this is super sketch. But they don't want to be the ones to come out and say it, and because MLB just gave them basically a free pass.
So that free pass was actually negotiated by the MLBPA, and this was a touchy subject for a lot of players too, because they're like, look, MLBPA, you represent all of us. That includes everyone on the Astros, but that includes all 29 other teams as well. But in that moment, the MLBPA had to, on behalf of those players, the Astros that they represent, they had to, be advocates for them and negotiate, some agreement with MLB in order for MLB to conduct an investigation and require that the players, participate in that investigation. So they've got to go through the MLBPA, who is going to make sure that they try to protect all the rights of the Astros, because those are the players that they represent. And they did that by getting them immunity. That was the way that they got the players to speak candidly about what happened. Was, you guys have immunity. Now that worked out great for the Astros, and you could say, the MLBPA did a great job there at protecting them. However, you also now had 29 other teams, and I heard it from plenty of players on these other teams who looked at it and were like, that cost me millions. That cost me my career. I don't play in MLB anymore because of it. And you protected them, but what about me? And that's so it's tough when you represent everyone, but the same thing happened with steroids. Finally the players as a whole said, enough of steroids, we want to have testing. And now that MLB is, they have some of the most strict testing of any sports league, but that was because, and that means that there are times where MLB players get popped, and and the MLBPA had to represent in any sort of appeals and whatnot, but it was the players as a whole that said, we want it out of the game. So it's tricky.
See, with steroids though, okay, so I'm a big, my favorite baseball players of all time are Ken Griffey Jr., A-Rod, and Barry Bonds. Well, Barry is number one. And because things weren't illegal in the game.
Wait, you're a Dodger fan?
Yes. But I was a huge, okay, go ahead.
He is. All right. The Dodgers just won a World Series, so
no, I've always been a Dodger fan.
and you're always a fan of whoever the number one bowler in the world is right now. George probably has
That's fine.
like their T-shirt and shoes.
Trevor's a fan of. He loves Alabama football. He loves the Patriots. And I'm like, why? You just like anyone who has this dynasty. And he was like, yeah. He goes, I'm a fan of greatness, and these are franchises that are great. And he goes, I love to see greatness. And I'm like, all right, whatever.
Listen. I can't help. I live in LA, Dodgers, Lakers. I live a charmed sports life. Unlike Ralph, who chose up bad. He chose like the Phoenix Suns, the Diamondbacks, and and Wyoming Cowboys. So that's
not gonna argue. I'm not gonna argue. I'm not going to argue with you. I appreciate all the success you've had in your life. I appreciate all the success Rachel's having. Everybody can win for my teams.
So what I was going to ask you, Rachel, is about MLB and steroids, because you brought it up. I just believe that the game benefited from so many people who were on performance enhancing substances. And then they turn around and turn their back on them into like people who helped grow the game, recover the game after the strike. And you don't know everybody who used. But then you put Bud Selig in, you got, Jeff Bagwell, Piazza, all people who were, Selig presided over the whole thing, and he's in. But then you don't let people like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens in, and I absolutely hate it with the power of 1,000 suns.
I've got a shirt I rock all the time that says Barry Bonds is a Hall of Famer on it. I fully believe he is. I think that was. Who are we years later to look back and say that, be the judge of who was using and who wasn't, when there wasn't any testing in place. Now, yep. I believe if once there was testing that was put into place, and at that point, anybody to test positive after, you're out. You don't have a choice. But up until then, I think the greats of that era, and of the sport in general, during that time, they should be allowed in.
Yep.
And now that's a part of MLB's history. You can talk about that in Cooperstown, about how during this era, this was so prevalent. But I struggle with this idea of like trying to, now we look back and we get to decide when, yeah, you're right. Like I have another shirt, and this is all from Trevor's media company, Momentum, but that says steroids saved baseball. And yep. I think it did. It saved baseball, after the strike. I think you can't punish these guys now. And, I think you could look at it and say, look, the commissioner has flat out said, and they've made it clear, they don't care about the foreign substance thing. Like, they're not going to enforce it, right?
Yep.
But now you see this slowly in the last couple months, they're making this shift of, well, maybe we actually could enforce. What if we got to a point where they strictly enforce the foreign substance thing? And now what do you do with this entire generation of pitchers? Because is it the same as PEDs? We go back and say, well, they definitely used a foreign substance, because in that case, basically like 95% of pitchers from this generation, they don't get allowed into the Hall of Fame.
Yep.
Everyone's saying sticky stuff. So it's a part of the story of baseball. And I think, you can't, until there are strict regulations put in place, and then people, get violating those, rules that are in place, you can't sit there and, hold these guys accountable for stuff that is not enforced and is, prevalent throughout the game.
I just try to imagine NBA fans tolerating the NBA Hall of Fame or the Naismith Hall of Fame not allowing Michael Jordan, Shaq, and Larry Bird. That's the baseball equivalent of what's happening when you have guys like Pete Rose and Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens and Mark McGwire on the outside looking in. And I can't imagine any other sport and the fans of that sport allowing that to happen. And it's crazy to me that there's that much of a power structure in baseball where we're that fragmented as fan bases where we say that, like, yeah, no, it's cool to get in because I'm not a Giants fan.
Yeah, it's bad. But I think you've got there's like that purist, old school kind of mentality in the sport that is so. They're all about like the purity of the sport, when in reality, I think everyone just needs to embrace like the sport is so far from it's been like that since the beginning.
Yes. Make baseball fun. Dude, I wanted to give Trevor Bauer a hug and a kiss in the mouth 2 weeks ago when when he came out and said, "Stop hitting people. It's weak." I was like, thank God somebody said it, like these stupid unwritten rules, which are antiquated and all of that. But before we let you out of here, Rachel, I have one more question, and Ralph can go. But okay, so you have been a trailblazer in the agent field. So has in the NFL, Nicole Lynn. You know, so many other people. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, all right, what's next for Rachel Luba, and how long before we see a coach in the MLB? I'm sorry, well, a manager. Well, it seems further in the MLB, but a coach in football, or as a head coach or general manager who is a female.
It's tough because I think we still have a long ways to go, and I say this because I think a lot of it starts just at, you know, I'm not for just putting a female into a position simply for the sake of having a token female. Like, I almost got a job at an agency for which I realized was largely because they just viewed me as a token female, not because they saw the value I offered. So, you know, in order to actually have women who are like qualified, and plenty of women who are qualified enough for these positions, it starts at, you know, kind of that grassroots level of letting young girls see at, you know, a young age that, hey, if you are interested in sports, like, these are all the different jobs you can have. There are plenty of young girls who love sports and they're like, I could be a broadcaster, because they see a bunch of women doing that. That's the one thing they really see, is you can be a broadcaster, sideline reporter, whatever. You know, it's gonna take, I think, women who are now in the industry, you know, speaking up and building platforms for themselves and encouraging young girls that there's so many opportunities that they can do, and they are welcome in the industry. But I think it's going to be a while, because I still think there aren't enough women that are, you know, girls that are, you know, that are qualified enough that can compete for these positions, because most just have been, you know, like, completely dissuaded from doing anything. And now there are still some, for sure, but like, it's competitive for guys. So I think it's going to start at a grassroots level, but hopefully, you know, in the next, you know, 10 years, like, we'll start seeing that, like, and it'll be normal.
I'm thankful for your presence and you putting yourself out there the way that you do. And then, you know, you have people like Bianca Smith with the Red Sox, and even Hannah Huseman, right, with the Philadelphia Phillies, who is like a mental health coach, and the stuff that she does and that some baseball players kind of spread around. You know, I've got 3 sons and a daughter, and I think the closest I ever saw any women being involved in the game was, you know, there's no crying in baseball. It was a Tom Hanks movie. It wasn't actually affiliated with Major League Baseball at all. Locally, we had a woman named Jody Jackson who covered the Diamondbacks and still does this day. But so one woman associated with baseball as I grew up as a fan, and I know that if my kids are somehow turned on to the game of baseball, which seems like it'll be difficult in the day and age of everything is 6-second attention span. If they ever find a way to latch onto baseball and connect, I know their experience is going to be a lot different than me, because there's people like you out there, Sandy Charles with MLB Network. There's all people all over the place. They're just going to see it through a completely different lens, and that's going to be incredibly important to all of them and the experience they have down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a little girl on Twitter who took a picture, or she tweeted at me and asked if I had advice on for career day. She wanted to be dress up as a sports agent. She's like, "What should I wear?" I'm like, that's so cool. When I was, I don't know if she's like 11, I don't know if if I wanted to be a sports agent, like if the thought of that's what you could do, I wouldn't know who to look to. I didn't know who to look to when I was at UCLA. Who's that other girl that I could point to and is like, oh yeah, she's an agent, she's doing it. So I think it's really cool.
I know I told you it was the last one, but here's my actual last one. So my wife went to UCLA, right? And she's a boss in her field and industry, and was in the commercial real estate world for so long, which is another male dominated industry. And she was absolutely crushing it. And some of the pushback that she would get from some of the men that she was beating up was, oh, she's just getting this because she's pretty, because she's, or she's sleeping with the guys, and all of this stuff, which wasn't true. And we know it's not true in your case. But like, do you even feel a need to address that, like to combat it? Or do you feel like, listen, I'm just not even I'm ignoring all stupidity?
I go back and forth on it, and sometimes I do address it. Sometimes I call out guys who, say things to me. Someone said to me the other day that, let's be real, you probably don't know much about the game at all. It's just that you're hot, so guys are cool with you being. Oh, whoops, it cut out. Sorry.
Okay.
But anyways, so I get comments like that all the time. And every now and then I do highlight them and point out, like, yeah, like how absurd it sounds. And the fact that I, am overly qualified, the fact that there's the requirement to be a baseball agent is you have to graduate high school. And I went to law school. Like, I went above and beyond. There are plenty that graduated high school, but I think it is important. And oftentimes I do want to, like, kind of respond to some of these dumb comments that I get. But I've also gotten to a point where I look at it and, I kind of just laugh. Often, sometimes I like screenshot stuff too and just like put it in a little folder on my phone and save it. And every now and then I'll put something out there of like how silly these people sound. But I look at it as, you guys are just, you're hating on me because you clearly can't fathom this idea that women can be successful, just purely based on what they can do. And so I kind of just try to like smile at it and keep having success, because there's nothing that makes people like those people more furious than seeing someone just continue to have success.
Yep. Yeah. And Rachel, you're going to have to admit though at some point in time that a penis makes you much smarter. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it must be the case.
Yeah. No, Rachel, you guys, she's Rachel Luba, absolute Renaissance woman, sports agent, young Forbes, 30 under 30, absolutely killing the game. I can't wait for all the amazing things that you continue to do. Thanks for coming on Right or Wrong. Thanks so much.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
All right. Okay, bye. So that was the interview with Rachel. What were your biggest takeaways?
It's always interesting to get somebody in the room who a lot of people have a preconceived or earned notion about in their mind. I'm sure that anybody who has an opinion on anything feels like they have it for a reason. But my experience leading up to this is anytime that I see Rachel Luba's name on anything that isn't directly related to work that she's doing or work she puts out is just people being mad online.
Yeah.
Like that's the to be very honest, that's most of what I see. I'm gonna send you a tweet right now, George. That is kind of a microcosm of the type of stuff that she gets in her mentions every day.
Okay.
You let me know what you think of that when you get
Okay.
it.
Okay. I got it. Here is the tweet. Rachel, go fuck yourself. You are bad for women in sports. How? How? How is a woman in sports bad and doing dope stuff bad for women in sports? It makes zero
I
sense,
have
dude.
no idea.
Dude,
I
I would
like
be
I told her at the
absolutely
end of the interview.
proud. I would be proud if my daughter went to do the stuff that Rachel Luba's doing. Like what
I
is
can.
there to
It's
she's a lawyer representing MLB players doing dope stuff. She's on Forbes 30 under 30. What is there to hate? Because she's a disruptor. I'm telling you, dude, it's people hate the fact that so I think in the industry she gets hate because she's a disruptor to their traditional financial system, right? Which is which I always thought was kind of criminal. Like, why am I paying my agent for negotiating a contract 4 years ago? And so that's why you have had players like Bobby Wagner,
Lamar
other
Jackson.
players, yeah, negotiate their own deals and just say, I'm just going to pay a lawyer to write this contract up. We are already negotiating all the terms ourselves. So I think that that's where some of the hate in the industry comes from. But the hate out in the world, I think it is very difficult sometimes for men when it comes to sports because they're like, no, we know sports, we own sports, we are men, and the idea that somebody might actually know sports more than you do is that's hard for people, dude. I'm telling you.
I just don't. I'm gonna be honest, man. I don't get it. I always thought it was. I always thought growing up it was more peculiar that we had an absence of women in professional sports than I did that women started to come into that space. Like I grew up, my mom wasn't around, she passed away, but everybody always told me she played baseball. She played softball when baseball stopped being allowed. She ran track. She was going to go to college to play hoops. She like star of the volleyball team. And in my head, I'm like, okay, well, this is the 1980s. You have a woman just like all these women all over the United States. They're all having the same exact experience that the men are playing sports in high school. Some of them even go on to do it in college. Why does it continue for men, but not necessarily continue for the women who love it? Like that was always 10 times more peculiar to
Well,
me that we had an absence that it just fell off in the same way that you're like, hey, how come all these coaches are white? That's weird. All the players are not white.
yeah.
So like those type of things have always struck me as more odd than the idea that somebody's trying to force change. People get scared of change. People get scared of encroachment, which I think is crazy because you have to have it in your head. You have to have it in your head that the best people haven't always been involved, whether it's in the negotiating room as an agent or as a general manager
Yep.
or shit, even as a third base coach or whatever. When you cut the hiring pool down to like 10% of the available people and you're going to try to pound your chest and say, we've actually done it right forever.
This is a
How
meritocracy.
is that
No,
not?
it's yeah, dude. You are 100% right because there's no way to quote unquote get the best people when you're not even interviewing part of the people. And the idea though that
Right.
And you brought up, and I wanted to bring this point up about the WNBA, is that where people say, oh, the WNBA, they don't do as much money, that's secondhand sports and all of that stuff. But WNBA ratings are up, their money is growing, their revenues are growing, attendance is growing, all of these sorts of things. And you got to remember, like, the league is like 20 some years old, like 20 years old. Like the NBA, like, people don't realize that in 19 that it wasn't until like 1980 or after that or somewhere around there that NBA games started being shown live, like championships. They were tape delayed. Like, it was not the behemoth that it has grown into. That's why players were making WNBA money back then, because it wasn't the cash cow that it is now with TV and media rights. So in 25 more years, if the WNBA is still at the same place that it is, then you can say that. But as for now, dude, it's a baby league. It's a baby league. Look at the MLS, which is probably a comparable example, right? This is men playing professional sports. Nobody wanted to watch the MLS. You could not pay people to watch it. And now all of a sudden, people get interested in their cities and in their leagues. Same thing if you create
Atlanta?
Yeah.
Atlanta, Georgia is a damn soccer town.
Yep.
It's a soccer town. Like, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, home of the Atlanta Falcons, you won't see a single Falcons insignia when it's soccer season there. You won't. Like, the 70,000 people, when you're allowed, 70,000 people show up to watch that soccer team play in Atlanta, Georgia.
A lot of black
All
folks in
it
Atlanta.
takes is yeah, I know. And Atlanta is, I would put Atlanta as a soccer town almost above anything else, based on what I've experienced the few summers that I've been there. I was just down there this past weekend. They had billboards all over the city, George, that was a 24-hour countdown clock to the first home game of the season. Soccer in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yep.
If that can happen, the WNBA can absolutely. It just has to be available.
Yep, exactly. And this is no different than the Pac-12. The Pac-12 suffers from an availability problem. So did the WNBA. The more available that they become, and the more that their stars become stars out and have social currency, then people will watch. I mean, shit, we watch Jake Paul and Logan Paul box because they're famous. You know what I mean? They're selling pay-per-view buys because they're famous, separate from their actual job. So to wrap all of this up, though,
but George, if you told somebody 15 years ago that the number one consuming habit in 15 years would be watching other people play video games, not playing video games, watching other people play video games,
yes,
what would you say?
There's not a chance in hell that's stupid, that's ignorant, it'll never take. And now you have people who show up, millions watch streams of League of Legends championships or Fortnite championships. Like, people watch it. My kids watch it. I occasionally tune in too. I'm not gonna act like I don't, but I don't watch it at the same level that they do. But you just have to be available to change and to the change that can potentially happen. So to wrap this all up, where do you think we see Rachel Luba 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
That was the reason I asked her the question I did about people who break shit. Because some people who break shit just need to keep breaking shit.
Yep.
And there's some broken stuff up at the top of baseball. And so, I mean, 5 years ago, there was no, she talked about her journey and the thing of people just now knowing, like, learning her name now and being like, well, you just blew up because Trevor Bauer, got a contract that any agent could negotiate. Like, she went to law school. Like, anybody who went to law school is not an overnight success.
Dude, and she negotiated, right. She won a record 12 arbitration cases. Like, that. Like, she didn't just win some arbitrations and was like, yeah, I'm gonna go be a lawyer. She won the most that had ever been won in a year, and then came out and was like, yeah, I think I'm gonna go be an agent. and people are saying, oh,
Yeah.
oh, it's only because she's hot. Yeah, all right. She will whip you with that hot brain. You will be on the losing end of a negotiation, messing around with her.
And that's what I'm saying. So you're asking me where I think she'll be by 33 years old, based on the trajectory of stuff that she's already done,
A
and her
commissioner?
mindset going in, and the fact. Oh my God, mate! Who knows, man? Here's my main point: is that after this conversation with her, the one thing that I learned that I didn't know before is the reluctancy that came um, with where she's gotten. And the truth of the matter is, she's doing what needs to be done in order to be relevant, in order to make the change in the people who are in her current circle of influence. If that circle of influence expands, she's the type of person who might look at a situation and see this certain thing is not something that I want to get into or be a part of, but it's for the greater good. And those are the people that you need, the people who are willing to embrace change that might not necessarily suit them, the people who aren't necessarily just lobbyists for their own self-interest, but lobbyists for everybody's self-interest, that they're willing to eat food that they don't think tastes good because they know it's nutritious, right? Like,
Yep.
and I think that mindset can take you a really long way in this world. And now that she knows more people and has more connections and has this track record of success that's publicly available, plus she has the ability to enhance her own legend and her own brand in a much better way than any other agent that I've ever, because the only other thing that any other agent ever did was make sure that they're in that camera shot on draft day.
Yep. See,
Right? Unless you're Lee Steinberg and you got Jerry Maguire made. Other than that, like, the self-promotion amongst the agents has always depended on traditional forms of media. She's doing it herself.
Yeah.
5 years from now, she could be anything.
So how many clients do you like? How big of an agent do you think that she'll be in 5 years from now?
If she still wants to be an agent and she's not bored of it, she could have. I mean, we could be talking about her in 5 years. We could be mentioning her name with the same gravitas. Well, there's still a little bit of disdain for this guy when you mention his name, but there's also a level of respect, and that's Scott Boras. Exactly.
Scott Boras, you owe
Exactly.
me, baby.
5 years at this pace.
You coming with me. Yeah, so I'm getting me a Luba sports shirt as soon as we get off of here, because I'm a supporter, man. I support people who come on the podcast, and also people that I like. So you guys though,
Let's see George Reister's mug on the Lubanati Twitter account. That's great.
Dude, absolutely. Why not? Dude, I don't think that I think that there is a lot of times people don't want to support other people who are doing dope shit. And I tell my son this all the time, who's 15. If you look at his Instagram, he's always bigging up his teammates, bigging up his friends. And that's from what I showed him that LeBron does. LeBron, when other people in the league, they do dope stuff, he's one of the first people to comment about it. And that gave other people license to comment on it and like not be like, oh, I got to hold this all to myself. No, I can recognize your greatness and still be great myself. You guys, this is Reister or Wrong. I am George Reister. He is Ralph Amsden. Thank you guys for joining us. Peace out. Catch you guys on Friday.